Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Bob Ottenhoff. I'm the President and CEO of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. Today's webinar is a special event for members of the media only in order to receive a preview of the second annual State of Disaster Philanthropy report, as well as a set of new online interactive tools for understanding disaster-related funding flows. I'll be presenting today along with Seema Shah, who is Director of Research for Special Projects at the Foundation Center and led the Foundation Center's team on this special project. During today's presentation, we'll provide background on the project, describe the research methodology, lift up key findings from this year's report, and demonstrate two new online interactive tools for examining funding flows, a data dashboard and mapping platform. We're also hoping to take your questions, and if you do have a question, you can go to the question and answer box or the chat box. Select host, type your question, and hit send. We'll try to leave enough time to get to all of your questions. The work we're sharing with you today builds on a partnership between the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and the Foundation Center, one that taps into the respective strengths and expertise of each of our organizations. CDP's mission is to transform disaster giving by providing timely and thoughtful strategies to increase donors' impact during domestic and international disasters. CDP aims to increase the effectiveness of contributions given to disasters and bring greater attention to the life cycle of disasters, from preparedness and planning to relief to rebuilding, resilience, and recovery efforts. Foundation Center has been around for nearly 60 years and is the leading source of data and information on philanthropy worldwide. Its data platform houses information on more than 130,000 foundations and 4 million grants. In recent years, Foundation Center has partnered with various organizations to make its data and information accessible through data visualization tools and issue-focused web portals. Our partnership with the Foundation Center allows us to collect and share better data on disaster philanthropy so that funders and other stakeholders will have the data needed to be more effective in their disaster giving. Disasters, almost by definition, are out of the ordinary. So as we are locked into our ordinary patterns of activity, we tend not to think about disasters until they happen. But while disasters may not be predictable, they do happen with regularity. In 2013, the year that our research focuses on, more than 300 country-level disasters occurred, affecting 109 countries and 96 million people, killing more than 22,000 people and resulting in economic damages of $118 billion. This included devastating tornadoes in Oklahoma, floods in Colorado, and Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, which took more than 6,300 lives. In other words, while disasters may shock us, they shouldn't surprise us. They will happen, and philanthropy will be called upon to respond. Given the inevitability of disasters, it's imperative for funders to make use of their dollars in the most effective way possible. In that spirit, our work focuses on three key questions. First, how have foundations responded to disasters? When do foundations step into the role of providing disaster-related funding? What do they fund? How much funding do they provide overall? Second, how does the foundation community respond to disasters, and how does that fit into the larger landscape of giving? How does the foundation funding compare to other sources of funding, such as corporate giving, bilateral, multilateral aid, and government assistance? And finally, what can foundations do to become more effective in terms of disaster-related funding? We're going to hear from Seema Shah now, who's going to tell us the results of the study. But before we get to Seema, I want to remind you once again that if you do have questions, you can go to the question and answer or the chat box, select host, type down your question and then hit send, and we'll be happy to answer your question. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Seema Shah, who's the Director of Research for Special Projects at the Foundation Center. Seema.
Thank you, Bob. So to examine these questions that Bob just laid out, our team at the Foundation Center started the process last year by working with an expert technical advisory committee to develop a project taxonomy that allows us to classify both disaster assistance strategies as well as various types of disasters. So you can see here in the diagram that assistance strategies cover the full life cycle of disasters, from resilience, reduction, and mitigation, to preparedness, to response and relief, and to long-term reconstruction and recovery. Disaster types can be classified into three major buckets. So the first bucket is natural disasters, which includes more specific breakdowns. The second bucket is man-made accidents, which includes things like oil spills and building collapses. And third, we have complex humanitarian emergencies, which include things like the Syrian refugee crisis. In addition, we have a fourth bucket that you'll see that we include in our analysis, which is disasters general, and that includes unspecified funding for disasters or multiple disparate disasters. So using this taxonomy as our guiding framework for analysis, last year we released our first annual report on disaster-related giving by foundations. In 2012, we found that foundation giving totaled about $111 million, and in this year's analysis, we examined foundation funding for 2013, which is the latest year for which we have comprehensive data. So in 2013, looking at all grants of $10,000 or more reported by 1,000 of the largest U.S. foundations, we found that funding increased slightly from the previous year to $116.9 million. The majority of this funding, about 68%, went to natural disasters, and of these, storms captured the most grant dollars. Much of this funding supported efforts related to Hurricane Sandy, which hit in late 2012. With respect to assistance strategies, the largest proportion of foundation funding, 42%, went to response and relief efforts, while 19% went to reconstruction and recovery. Similar to the previous year, larger U.S. foundations gave grants predominantly for disasters taking place in the U.S. So 54% of grant dollars went to North America, 24% of grant dollars went to Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific, and 15% went to Africa, and 3% went to Latin America. Responding to disasters is an enormous task that no single sector can accomplish on its own. And so what's unique about this year's research effort is that not only did we analyze funding by U.S. foundations, we also tapped into publicly available data and looked at funding flows from other donors. You can take a look at the report for more detail, but here's a quick rundown of what giving looks like from these other data sources. In reviewing Foundation Center's database beyond the top 1,000 funders, we documented an additional $60.1 million for disaster-related giving from smaller foundations and public charities. This is not a comprehensive total, but gives you an idea of the substantial contributions smaller funders make to this field. By far the largest flows of aid for disasters and humanitarian crises come from governments. For example, FEMA, the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency, distributed more than $11 billion in grants in 2013. Governments also distribute bilateral aid, or giving to other countries. In 2013, the 29 members of the OECD Development Assistance Committee, which includes countries like the U.S., the EU, Japan, and others, reported $13.6 billion in disbursements to developing countries for disasters and humanitarian crises. UN OCHA, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, also collects information on humanitarian aid through its financial tracking service. The financial tracking service is a comprehensive source of real-time humanitarian aid contributions, And digging into their database, we identified an additional $2.4 billion in commitments and contributions from non-DAC donors and multilateral organizations. We also looked at corporate giving data. Based on data from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation and Foundation Center's own data collection efforts, we found at least another $179 million in pledges. Corporate giving data are not collected systematically, so these numbers are likely to be an underestimate of giving, and this is certainly one of the areas we'd like to focus on in the future as we aim to get better data on disaster giving. And increasingly, individuals and organizations are giving via online platforms. Again, there's no way to get at this data systematically, but we took a look at 2 online platforms for illustrative purposes, Global Giving and Network for Good. And in 2013, we found there was $27.5 million in disaster-related giving flowing through Network for Good's platform, and an additional $3.6 million via Global Giving. So looking at across all these data sources, we documented $27.6 billion for disaster assistance in 2013. And while there are gaps in what we know about funding flows in support of disasters and humanitarian crises, this analysis starts to paint a picture of the scale of global disaster-related philanthropy. So the print publication this year is complemented by the Measuring the State of Disaster Philanthropy dashboard, which allows users to interact with the 2013 data based on their specific areas of interest. The dashboard provides analysis and aggregated data. For users that are interested in seeing details at the grant level or the disbursement level, we've also built a mapping platform that visualizes who's funding what, where. We're especially excited about the map because this is one of the first efforts in the field of disaster philanthropy that allows users to compare foundation funding with other funding sources in a single data visualization tool. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes now to show you what each tool looks like. On the dashboard, you can select a data source, which gives you options from OECD, UN OCHA, FEMA, corporate giving, and global giving data. Users can also filter here by disaster type, disaster assistance strategy, and by region. As users scroll down the page, they see relevant breakdowns of the data, as well as top funders and top recipients for each data source. Users can also filter the information to see information for a single disaster type, assistance strategy, or region. In this case, natural disasters. Or users can customize their search further, selecting a combination of 2 or more filters. Again, the dashboard focuses on aggregated data for 2013. With the mapping platform, we've included all available data from 2011 onwards, and we give users the opportunity to see disaster-related giving at a much more granular level. So like the dashboard, users can filter by disaster type and disaster assistance strategy, but instead of looking more broadly at regions, users can drill down data to the country level or to specific individual U.S. states. The map is set up so users can compare foundation giving to another data source. By default, the map compares foundation giving to bilateral giving of DAC donors, but this can be changed to other data sources, including global giving, FEMA, and UN OCHA. So on the map, selecting a country provides a close-up view of giving in that particular country. Here, we've zoomed in on Nepal, for example. And then the list view generates the full list of foundation grants as well as the data source with which it is being compared. And then the specific grant can be clicked on to provide more detailed information, including the purpose of the grant. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bob, who's going to provide a few final thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much, Seema. Again, just a reminder to those listening, you can ask us questions by going to the Q&A box or the chat box. Select host, type your question, and hit send. So what are a few takeaways from this presentation and this report? Here are 4 for you to think about. 1, Taking into account both large foundations and smaller regional foundations, we documented $177 million in giving from foundations in 2013. It's clear that foundations bring substantial resources to the table. At the same time, across sectors, we found more than $27 billion in giving. Thus, it's imperative that foundations connect with a larger network of government, individual, and corporate donors in order to build partnerships that can help maximize limited dollars. We believe the tools that we've developed will help donors to understand the funding landscape more fully and identify opportunities to address funding gaps, increase collaboration, and make more strategic decisions. A second takeaway is that in the coming year, we plan to make these tools much more robust by improving the currency, quality, and quantity of data. We'd like to work with foundation and corporate donors in particular so that they can share their data with us directly in a more timely fashion. With respect to quality, one of the challenges, for example, is that we often have limited information about what specific disaster assistance strategies are employed. So we also plan to work with grant makers to provide more precise information so that we can understand more fully how donors are investing across the disaster life cycle. Another takeaway has to do with how to collect more data. Our analysis relies on publicly available data, but we know there is additional giving we're not accounting for, particularly from foundations outside of the U.S., smaller and regional foundations, and corporate giving. In the coming months, we plan to build a data gathering network that allows us to pull in more disaster-related data and paint a more complete picture of key actors in the field. Ultimately, the more we can do on this front, the better equipped our tools will be to foster greater collaboration and coordination in the field. We hope one of the takeaways, finally, from today's session is to realize that response and relief is just part of a larger picture that takes the full disaster life cycle into account. The full life cycle of disasters encompasses, on the front end, risk reduction, mitigation, preparedness, and resilience efforts that can minimize the economic and human losses associated with disasters. And on the back end, recovery and reconstruction efforts that can help communities rebuild and thrive following the devastation of disasters. In other words, there's a need for philanthropists to be less reactive and more strategic in their disaster-related investments. While few, if any, foundations consider themselves to be disaster philanthropists, all foundations will at some time or another find themselves facing the question of how best to respond when disasters occur. So whether they acknowledge it or not, foundations will find themselves in the role of disaster philanthropists at some point. And like all other forms of philanthropy, a strategic approach is typically more effective than ad hoc ones. A goal of CDP and of this project is to raise awareness of the fact that all funders have a role to play with respect to disaster philanthropy and to provide funders with the data and tools they need to play that role effectively. That ends our presentation. At this point, we're happy to field your questions. You can do so by using the Q&A or the chat box. Select Host, type your question, and hit Send. On behalf of Seema and myself, thanks very much, and we look forward to answering your questions. Seema, here's a question that maybe you can answer for us. How do you want people to use the new digital tools you're introducing today?
That's a great question, Bob. So we have a few different thoughts on how folks can really take advantage of the tools that we've built. For the map in particular, it's a great way to get a landscape of who's doing what, and so we think that's an opportunity to identify potential partners and collaborators, and ultimately this will help minimize duplication of effort and maximize impact, particularly in the case of disasters where foundations and other actors are often responding quickly to events on the ground. And along those lines, we hope that that it helps with strategic decision making and thinking about where the funding gaps are. Bob, at the very end, you talked about the importance of investing in the full life cycle of disaster. So I think one of the ways that we can use these tools is really try to understand how much is actually going to preparedness, how much is actually going to recovery and reconstruction efforts, and are there potential gaps there that funders can come in and help address?
Sima, here's another question, and it kind of relates to what you were just talking about. And this question is, how can data be used to develop a strategy in response to an emergency that evolves quickly? And I guess just to get the conversation started, we're not at the point yet, I guess I would say, where we have that mechanism in place to do something in real time, although we're getting to that point. And we hope that this data gathering network we're creating, where we're going to be gathering information from both donors and from recipients in real life time, we hope, will eventually provide us with the kind of real-time data that we're looking to develop. But Sima, maybe you could respond to this as well in terms of how a donor might use this information during an emergency.
Sure. Well, I think you're right that we're a ways off from having real-time data on these platforms, but I think the historical data is useful too. So, for example, when the earthquake hit in Nepal, you could go to the mapping tool and see who has been active there in the past. And so if a funder is thinking about responding to an emergency and doesn't necessarily have expertise or experience in that particular area or region, they can quickly go to the map and find out who has been there in the past, connect with those folks, and figure out what some potentially effective ways are to intervene by connecting with with organizations and funders who have had previous experience there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we really can't change our behavior or begin to think about the balances unless we know what they currently are, and that's also what this data will begin to provide. And I would add to those who are asking, can we get this data quickly during a disaster, that the Foundation Center and CDP have begun to collaborate when there are disasters, and there are relationships that major foundations now have with the Foundation Center that do provide real-life data, so real-time data. So it's not every contribution, but it's a significant portion of all of the contributions that are coming in during disasters. But over time, I think we'll build this data gathering network that we hope will provide the kind of real-time data that people are looking for. Seema, would you tell our participants when this report will be made available and how they'll be able to get hold of a copy of it?
Sure. We go live tomorrow morning with the report as well as the mapping tool and the dashboard, and they can be found on disasterphilanthropy.org.
Another question coming in for you, Seema. Will Foundation Center be doing future data collection, or will you need foundations, donors to be actively giving you information? Is that currently a barrier, and how do you surmount that?
Well, we're always collecting data from a variety of sources, including IRS forms, press releases, numerous other sources. That process is always enhanced and expedited when we can get foundations to proactively share their data with us. So one of the things that we have on the map is a little widget at the bottom that says, "Are you on the map?" And funders can click on that and get information about our electronic grant reporting program, which is a mechanism through which foundations can directly share their data with us really at any point in time. So that allows us to get more current data, and it allows foundations to directly share that data with us without us having to go to different sources.
Okay, so that concludes our report for now. You've been listening to Seema Shah, who's the Director of Research for Special Projects at Foundation Center. I'm Bob Ottenhoff, President of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. We're both in our offices today and happy to field your phone calls or emails today or anytime later this week if you have more questions about the state of disaster philanthropy. It'll be available, as Seema said, starting tomorrow, and it'll be online. So thank you so much for attending this special briefing, and we look forward to further dialogue with you. Thank you so much.